Hello and welcome back. Today I have an oscilloscope and it is the Hantek. It's from the 5000 series and I bought the step-in version. It is the DSO5072P. It's a 2-channel 70 MHz oscilloscope, and this one is very popular because it is around for 5 or 6 years or even more, and people were able to hack it or upgrade it to a frequency of 200 megahertz, they say. And I have been reading some comments on Banggood when it was sold, and people say it comes out of the box already for 200 megahertz. And I just like to verify that, because if that is the case, then you have I checked today, for 175 euros, you have a 200 megahertz 2-channel oscilloscope. So that would be really nice. So let's verify that, and if it turns out that it is not out of the box, maybe we can try to hack it if it's still possible now in 2022. So let's have a look. Well, let me show you some of the comments that I saw. So these people claim that it is out of the box 200 megahertz. So maybe it is because of this time base that you can set to 2 nanoseconds, because I've been reading back for the first type of hacks that there were with the old firmware. And then if you had the 70 megahertz model, the time base, the lowest you could set it, or the fastest, was 4 nanoseconds. And now with the newer firmware, all the scopes can be set to 2 nanoseconds. But for me, that is not proof that it can go to 200 megahertz. I really like to test it. Well, I'm just gonna do a very quick unboxing, because I like to show you it is really new out of the box. Well, I took it out of its paper. I have two probes, 90 megahertz probes. So if you want to use it for 200, you need more. It comes with the CD. It comes with the power plug. It even comes with USB. And well, that's it. Well, as you can see, it is really brand new. I can take the foil off because I'm probably going to open it, so the warranty is lost anyway. I was lucky because I bought it in the Christmas time, and then it was even below 175, and on top of that I had some vouchers. So that was a super nice deal, and it does look proper. It has a USB and power. Well, that's it. It came with the CD, so the software is also available, but the latest you probably want to download from the website, so you have the latest. Well, let's switch it on. Ooh, the lights are very bright. Hantek. Very nice. I'm not going to do a hands-on, but I just like to verify if we indeed can go to 200 megahertz. And well, the time base can be set to 2 nanoseconds, so okay, that is indeed true. What machine do we have? Can I see that here? How can I go to the menu? Utilities, self-calibration, system information, the model, all the firmware serial numbers. You see the boot count. Well, I only remember it being switched on once, so someone switched it on. Maybe that's the test. So how can we determine the maximum frequency that it can do? And then we're talking about the sine wave, because if it can actually do the 200 megahertz, it is usually on a sine wave, because if you want to measure something other than a sine wave, like a square, they even say you need 3 times to 5 times the frequency that you're actually measuring. And that has not only to do with the bandwidth, the analog bandwidth, if we can call it that, but it also has to do with the response time of the oscilloscope and all the electronics inside. And that is measured in the race time. And I will explain a little bit about both. Well, first of all, for the analog bandwidth, I found this document from Sigland, and I will share the link, and I will even put it for download. And they talk about if this is the voltage of the sine wave you are measuring, and this is the frequency, that at some point the signal will get weaker, and that just has to do with how the oscilloscope is built, maybe some of the op-amps, and it has a maximum frequency, and it can have many factors, but this is what you can measure. And the maximum of that analog bandwidth, if we can call it that, if it goes down minus 3 dB or 70%, that is the point where we say, okay, that is the maximum frequency. And how does that look on the oscilloscope? Well, if we have the sine wave like this, and the frequency becomes higher, then at some point it will get weaker. So when we have here 70%, that is the max, and I can show you that. Okay, we are looking now at my Sigland oscilloscope, and it should do about 200 MHz. I'm now putting in a signal of 180 MHz, and if people think you don't have a terminator, yes, I have. I have these inline ones. So I'm just doing it like this, because then it's easier to see when the amplitude goes down. And so if I increase the frequency, 190, 200, 210, 220, you clearly see it now starts to drop. So this oscilloscope is rated for 200, but as you can see, the 70% is around 210, 220. So that is the first test we can easily do. Just see, will it get to 70 MHz or will it go to 200 MHz? Let's have a look what happens. Let's do that again. 30 MHz, 40, 50, 60, 70. Now you see it really going on 80, 90, 100. So it really looks like the point is the 70 MHz. But there is another way of checking this. So that is one part of the test, and it really looked like it started to go down at 70 MHz. So in that sense, yes, it is a 70 MHz scope, but that is not the only thing, because the bandwidth could have been limited by the software, or maybe just by a simple cap on the input. If you put a little capacitor from the input to ground, then after a certain frequency it starts to conduct, and then the signal goes down, so it doesn't reach the ADC. But there is something else, and that is the rise time. And the rise time is actually how fast can the scope respond. And on the sine wave, the rise time is not that fast, but on a square, it is one of the steepest curves. It's like straight up. So there you can see the rise time. And let me show you an example of that. So if we have here the zero line and we just have our sine wave, then the response time is how fast the oscilloscope can detect that this voltage is going up, because we have our voltage here. And as you can see, it actually goes, if this is the time, as you can see, it doesn't need to go up that fast. So a sine wave could be very easy. So what happens if we want to measure a square? And then, as you can see, if we look over time, this is like 0. So how fast can the oscilloscope detect this? And if the oscilloscope is a little bit slow, the rise time is slow. Instead of going straight up, it will be going a little bit like this, and it will be delayed because it is slow. So if your oscilloscope rise time is a little bit too slow, it will just at some point will start showing sine wave and not a square wave. So that means you are not looking at what you're actually measuring, and that's why the rise time is also important. Here I have a little example of how the rise time influences what you actually see on the screen. So clearly I have here a square wave, and I have it at 10 MHz, and I will try to increase the frequency. I go to 20, it's still a square, 30. The square already starts to look a little bit different. And now 40, 50, 60, 70 MHz. You can already see that it is become a sine wave, and that is just because of that rise time is a bit slow. Well, to show you I'm not doing any dirty tricks, I will change it here to an oscilloscope with a faster rise time, and you will see this is much more square than here, because here it is just a sine, and it is purely rise time. So to measure this rise time, we need a very, very fast square wave generator. And you can build those yourself. I saw one from Alan, W2AEW. He created a little Smith trigger with a 74 AC14, and that should be able to do 2 nanoseconds or 1 nanosecond, depending also how well you build it. And he even has a video where someone else improved his design, and that reached also very fast times. But I want to be sure I'm not looking at the delay of my home built Smith trigger square wave generator. I want to have something that is tested to be fast. And then I found this guy, Leo Botner, I think, if I pronounce correctly, Leo Botner. He is from the UK, and he has this fast pulse generators, and I have one here. I will zoom in on it later. And it should do about 40 picoseconds. So then I'm sure if I look at the rise time, it is purely the delay of my oscilloscope and not my generator. And it even came with the test report. And he has the rise times and the fall. And the rise time is even 36 picoseconds, so it's even doing better than he sold the test. So that is good. So let's play a little bit with that. I will connect it first to my Sigland, and then we can see also if the table makes sense that I created, and then we put it on the Hantek. Yes, with the terminator it seems a little bit better. Yeah, there is still some overshoot, but that's okay. The thing is that we need the edge very, very steep. So let's see if we can switch on some measuring and see what the rise time is of this oscilloscope. I switched on all the measurings, and the oscilloscope needs to be able to measure it properly. So you need to zoom in enough so it can measure. And as you can see, the more you zoom in, the more easy it can measure. And so we need to measure the time between this, but here it's already in the display. It even says 1.4, 1.64. And if we go a little bit like this, it says 1.5. So let's say it's 1.5. Then we get our table. So here we have the table. We were around 1.5, 1.4. So that means, let's pick just the 1.5, that this oscilloscope should be able to detect that up to 233 MHz. So the Sigland, yes, it is absolutely made for 200 because it also passed the test for the analog bandwidth. Let's have a look at the Hantek. Okay, we are able to trigger, and we can try to see. I'm not that familiar with this oscilloscope, so if I need to make a guess, it is here 4 nanoseconds. If we take 10% off here, 10% off here, we are a little bit more than 1 division, so that means it's 4 or 5 nanoseconds. But let's see if we can put some measure menu. Yes, there is indeed an option that can do it for you, and it will display here. It is 4.6 nanoseconds. So let's get our table there. Okay, if we have our table there and we go between 4 and 5, then you see that it is still best to measure 70 to 88 MHz. So 200, I say no, not out of the box. So that is a pity, and I hope you are not disappointed. Out of the box, it is not 200 MHz. Yes, you can set the time base to 2 nanoseconds, but if we have seen now, it doesn't mean anything. The analog bandpass is around 70, and if we look at the rise time, we also end up with around 70, but it doesn't mean it cannot still be hacked. So let's dive into that later. And there is another thing that is also important, and let's say if we are able to remove the bandwidth limit and we can somehow improve the rise time, because maybe that is also limited by or the firmware or by something else. There is also something else, and that is sample rate. The sample rate needs to be fast enough to actually, if you go to these frequencies, that your ADC is fast enough to actually also sample the right things. Well, the amount of samples is easy to see. You just zoom into the oscilloscope, you look at the top, and it's just there. Here it says 200 MHz and 1 giga samples per second. And that is kind of normal. 200 MHz, 1 giga sample. If you have a scope up to 100 MHz, it usually does 500. And if you go lower, 70 MHz sometimes even goes to 250. Well, let's have a look then at the Hantek. It's just there also 70 MHz, and look there, it is 1 giga samples per second. So that is promising. That is a sample rate that you usually have for the 200 MHz scope. Okay, let's see if it is possible to hack the oscilloscope or upgrade the oscilloscope to this higher frequency. The sample rate is already good, but we saw the analog bandwidth is not there, and the rise time is also not there. I found on the EFI blog, I found nice posts, and they actually split per model, per series number. They split exactly where you need to go. So I will share those links. Okay, well, there is a very old hack, and then you need to open your oscilloscope, and then you need to have a TTL to USB converter, and then when you connect that, you can shell into your oscilloscope. But there is also already a newer hack, and that is the change bandwidth tool. And that what that actually does, it is renaming it's renaming a directory inside of the root, and it is editing some files, and then you reboot it twice, and then indeed you see the 2 nanoseconds, but on top it should actually work. So let's have a look if that works. Okay, that change bandwidth tool I will leave also in the links. First, I like to do a backup, and there is also someone who made a backup tool. It's also on the EFI blog. I will also put the link down, and it is Tools P Models. And what you need to do, and I can show you that you need to have a new empty USB stick. So I have my empty memory stick here, and I downloaded the Tools P Models. And then instead of doing a firmware upgrade, well, you go to the options of doing a firmware upgrade, but then it will execute that little script, and that script just copies certain files to the memory stick. So when you kind of break it or something goes really wrong, you can always restore that backup. And I think you need another program again to do that backup, to do the restore, but at least we have the files, so we need to start somewhere. So let me show on the computer how we put this on the stick. Okay, let's put in the USB stick. I have my tools right here. This is the stick. Here is my stick. Here is my tools. What's on the zip file? Backup P models. Yes, I want to do a backup. I need to move that file here. And how to do? Okay, copy to the empty flash drive, insert it into the oscilloscope, do a firmware update, and it will create a folder with all the backups. Okay, perfect. Let's do exactly that. Okay, let's try to make this backup. I'm putting in my memory stick, and then at some point it will probably light up if it detected it. Yes, I see a little disk, so it detected something. I need to go to the utility menu, firmware update, F5 to confirm. Yes. And now instead of doing a firmware update, it will execute that little script that is there, and it will make a backup. Okay, the oscilloscope restarted, After it was fully restarted, I took out the memory stick, and here we have it. This is that little script. Here we have the dump file, and here we have a backup of all our files that is needed. If something goes wrong, then we can at least restore the oscilloscope. Okay, I have downloaded that DSO bandwidth changer tool. Here, the zip file. I will leave that also in the bottom. And if we open that, we have here the program I started, and then you can select what you have right now, because it needs to rename a folder, so it needs to know what is the old folder, and then it will rename the folder to the same. So if we wanted to 200 MHz, we select here 200, and the 70 and the 60 model are the same, so I can just select 60 here, and then you click OK. But it says please connect the oscilloscope. So let's see if we can just connect the USB cable, or maybe first we need the drivers from the CD that came with the oscilloscope. So I have the USB cable in my hand. What I usually do is open my device manager, because then I can see what actually happens, and usually you should see a port being added or not, or it will appear as something setting up device. Well, it says here it is a gadget serial 2 point something, and I'm not sure it will detect the driver. It doesn't, so I think we maybe need a driver from Hantek, so we need to install the software of Hantek, I think. Well, I downloaded the original software from the website of Hantek. You need to extract it, and then it's in a folder, and it comes with the driver. So I will just run the setup quickly. Okay, after the software is installed, the oscilloscope is recognized, and I'm just putting a signal on the screen also, and it appears here, so there is communication. So let's see if we start now that bandwidth tool, and I will also put my camera to the front of the oscilloscope so we can see what's going on there. Let me go back to my folder there, and I will edit it later in. So look, now it says 60 200 change bandwidth. Let's see what happens. Your scope should now reboot. Please reconnect. I don't see the scope rebooting, so maybe we should do that. I will unplug my USB, switch off the oscilloscope, it still works. I do see now that this is not the sign that we saw before. It is now almost a square. Okay, before it looked like a sine wave, and now it actually does look more like a square. Can we see in the utility, in the system information? No, it still thinks it is the 5072, so the model name has not changed. Okay, that looks very promising. It was very simple. We just installed first Hantek software, so we have the driver of the oscilloscope. Then we downloaded the tool to change the bandwidth. You select the 60 MHz as original, the 200 as what you want to have. You start it. That's it. Unplug the USB, reboot the oscilloscope, and as we see now, that was a sine wave first, and now it looks already a little bit more like a square. So there were changes for sure. So they did, or by the software, now the bandwidth limit has changed, but also the arise time, it seems. So let's look what that is for real. Okay, we are here at 20 MHz, and I will just go up 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. It is not getting much smaller. By now the square is already a little bit less a square, but we already at 120 MHz. And this is normal, because if you want to measure a square wave, you need at least 3 to 5 times the frequency that you need. So 180, 190, and now it's going. So it seems now that the analog bandwidth, oh, yeah, that is now changed to 200. Okay, let's check the rise time. Nice feature, by the way, the auto setup, just like on the Sigland. And let me zoom in a little bit. Well, according to the oscilloscope, it is between 1.6 and 1.7 nanoseconds, 1.8. Okay, let's say 1.8. Let's get the table. Yes, that is amazing. The heck did work. We are around the 1.8, so it's between here. So even according to the rise time, we should now be at 200 megahertz. So that went pretty well. I see now that the firmware is kind of old. It is from 2011-20, but I have now a version that I found on the internet from the official website of Hantek, and that is the 2021-02. So that seems a lot newer. If the first numbers are the year, newer is usually better. The safest way to do this, maybe, but I'm not even sure if it's the safest way. But I would think that is now undo the bandwidth modification and then do the firmware update. Then do again the patch. But I found that the firmware is for the whole 5000 series, so not necessarily for this model only. So I do have a backup, and let's see what happens if I do the update directly. Okay, we are here on the version 2011-20, and I don't know, maybe I need to zoom in here. 2011-20. So I still have the bandwidth patch in place. So what happens if I would do the firmware update now without switching it back first? We wait until we see the disk drive. Yes, there it is, detected it. We do the firmware update. Confirm. Okay, it should do now a firmware update, and let's see if we now break it or it will just do what you expected and do the update, because it's for the whole 5000 series, so maybe it will just do it. Okay, it seemed to have done something. Let's go to the system information, and yes, it did do an update. It resets the boot count also immediately, and it is now on 210225. So that could be February 25th, 2001. So at least it seems a lot newer than it was. And let's do a quick test with the rise time. Okay, that looks good. It is still very low. Now it is even 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. So that is still about 200 megahertz. So even without undoing the bandwidth patch, I just, after I did the patch, I just immediately upgraded the firmware. No problem, it keeps working, so you don't need to be afraid of that. Wow, that is just amazing. It did work, and now it does not come upgraded out of the box, but yes, it's very easy to do. And if you do this, I would advise you to really make the backup first, because then you can get help if something goes wrong. But in my case, it immediately went right the first way, and we did verify it. The analog bandwidth is okay. It can go to around 200, maybe 190, but it's good enough. The rise time is about 1.7, 1.8, what should match around 200 megahertz also. And we did see that before the patch that we did, it was not possible, and now it is. Wow, great work from the guys from EEV blog that put this patch together. So thank you for that. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.